We're here, and we have the beautiful, amazing, intelligent, and not in all that order, Mara Wilson. And we're really excited to talk to her on Vulnerable today. We've been able to chat several times before, but what I love about Vulnerable is that we really get into the journey that a lot of people may not really comprehend, and kind of coming at it from a place of, hey, like, I see you, you see me, we are friends, let's chat about it. So welcome to Vulnerable.
Yeah, thanks. I always love working with you in any capacity, whether we're doing something fun or we're doing something a little more intense. It's always fun. It's always a good time.
And you know what? So we did a cooking show.
Yeah, we did, which was fun.
That was awesome. Like, scoring you as a guest to me was such a big win for me because I had been, I think, reaching out to you and in appreciation of your op-ed. And I was like, wowed. And then to bring you on my very like lighthearted cooking show felt like we're like, oh, but there's a tart that we're making, and yet we want to talk about like childhood
By the way,
trauma.
This is one of my cats. His name is either Basil or Basil. And the cats, of course, every time I'm recording, they come over, and that's when they want attention. So that's very Basil. That's like a more Basil, not a Basil as much. Well, we call him, I mean, he's my sister's cat, really. And my sister's much more easygoing than I am. So she's like, I don't care what people call him. So she called him Basil, but she has a lot of friends who say Basil. But when he misbehaves, we call him Dweezil. I don't know why. That's another thing that she does, Dweezil. I guess like Dweezil Zappa, but Dweezil Zappa seems like a nice guy, so it has nothing to do with, I don't know. And she doesn't even know who Dweezil Zappa is, I don't think. She just heard the name. But yeah.
Wait, Dweezil Zappa is a musician, or what is he?
He is. He's a musician. Yeah, he's the son of Frank Zappa, who's,
Got it. Got it.
But
do you know Dweezil Zappa?
I don't. I don't. Okay. And I don't know if my sister knows who he is really. Although I was in a documentary a couple years ago about child actors, and then I did. And Alex Winter, who directed that, who was also a child actor, went on to direct another documentary about Frank Zappa. So I guess I do have kind of a 6 Degrees thing going on.
Honestly, it's 6 Degrees of Mara Wilson all the time because you've been around for so long. I think that, like, when people say that to me, I'm like, God damn it, I'm old. I get it. Shut the fuck up. But at the same time, that's not what I mean to say. Is it's more or less like people don't realize that your career spans so long because we still are relatively young looking. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, people either think that I'm 12 or that I'm 50 and that it's always been that way. Like, I just look like... I mean, a couple years ago, or actually, no, more than a couple years ago now, probably more than 10 years ago, I was working in a middle school, and I had somebody come up to me and be like, oh, you're here on a Saturday? And I was like, yes, this is my job. And he was like, oh, sorry, I thought you were like 14 at the most. He thought I was an 8th grader. Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
So that's
compliments are a funny thing, and I would imagine that over your lifetime, you've had to see a very different side of humanity.
It's true. I've kind of seen all of like the best and the worst, over the years. I feel like I really have, and some just from my own family, the best sucks. And the worst, which sucks. Yeah. But I mean, like, everybody has crappy relatives. And I think though that like, but I really have sort of, it's funny because I remember I was talking with Will at the convention that we did a couple months ago.
Yeah.
I was talking with people and I kept saying like, oh, I should come to this place. I have a friend who lives there. Oh, I should come here. I know someone who lives there. And Will said, we get it, Mara. You have a million friends.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah. And I was like, Will, I'm your friend too. Like, and I told him actually, I was like, let me come over to your house and I'll like play board games with you and your wife. Cause like,
and you're like truly meaning that, like,
yeah.
Okay. So let's get into this. Cause like, I do feel like we are kindred people and that we don't hold back for the sake of keeping people comfortable. And
I've tried to do that, but it never works.
Yeah.
It never works. I am unfortunately and fortunately
authentic.
Yes, I am painfully sincere. I'm a total tryhard. I really am. That's just who I am. And I've tried to be different, I've tried to be different through the years, but it just didn't work. And
yeah, we got to talk about that, because I can relate to that 1000%. And I think it's a lot of the reason why people really have a hard time transitioning out of childhood in the industry. And the whole name of the game is being a try-hard. Who's the best try-hard?
The best try-hard and a people pleaser.
Yeah, and that can, and it's not all bad. I want to just put that out there. Like, I feel like when we've had Allison Stoner on, we were really, it was very important for us to understand that, like, it's a complex conversation. Yeah. That while people think that this is simple as a headline in the news and, oh, look who's, like, spinning out of control now, I'm very protective over those kinds of ways of thinking. Because it's not helpful.
I definitely am too. And I also think that, I think that probably, like, you asked me about my relationship to social media, and
I did.
I find it very addictive, and I think that the irony for me is that I think it makes you feel, or at least when I first started doing it publicly, it gave me the feeling that I had more control over what people were saying about me, because I could cut out the middleman and I could just appeal directly to people. And I remember, because when I was, in high school and I wasn't acting anymore, and I was in college and I wasn't acting anymore, I would see people like spreading rumors about me, and that frustrated me. It was really weird. There was that, there was the one that I was dead. There was a rumor that I was dead when I was 12 or 13. And I was a really morbid 12-year-old, so I actually just found it funny. I remember thinking, like, oh, nice, I'm right up there with Paul McCartney. Because, that's good company to be in. But I think that I had to laugh it off, and now I look back on that, of course, and I look back on a lot of the things that happened to me when I was that age, and I just think, oh God, if anybody did that to any child that I care about, I might murder them. And so,
your morbidity that you're talking about, is that's gotta be something that was a reaction to some of the way that you were growing up, though, at the time, right?
Oh, definitely. Some of it was my mother's death. I think. Okay. I was going to say, the movie Now and Then.
I love that movie. Yep.
Yeah, I love that movie too. And you probably know some people who are in Now and Then. I know people who are in Now and Then. And I remember Christina Ricci's character in that really spoke to me, because her mother died, and she had her father and 2 older brothers in that. And I had a father and 3 older brothers. And her whole thing is that she is a tomboy, but she kind of leans into being a tomboy more than really, like, she maybe wanted to. And that was definitely my thing too, because I felt like being a girl was kind of a liability, and it was a scary thing. And I saw how concerned my father was about the way that the world was going to treat me because I was a girl. So I just kind of, and I don't think my dad knew, but my dad is the kind of person, my dad is who I get my sincerity from. Like, my dad also cannot lie. And my dad also is very expressive. And so if he's thinking something or feeling something, you will see it on his face, even if he doesn't say anything. And so that, I think, was something that was a character that I really related to. And another reason that I really related to her is they say that she keeps trying to make death funny. And I remember thinking, uh-oh, I do that.
Yeah. And why didn't you audition for this part? Were you too young?
I was too young. I was like 6 when that came out. I was too young. Yeah, I was.
But you saw it when you were 12.
But I saw it at a sleepover when I was 9 or 10, and I was like, uh-oh, I know which one I am. And there was, and yeah, that movie really helped. I don't know Christina Ricci, but I feel like I should, if I ever meet her, I should say, like, thank you for that, because that was a movie that really helped me. But I was very morbid, and also I think that...
She was really morbid, by the way. She went to professional children's school with me.
Yeah.
And it was her time where she's come out in interviews and has talked about the fact that she would cover the mirrors up in her, and she was bleaching her hair. She looked very, like, whole, she looked very like cool, edgy, like like so sexy, but like at the same time like very like 90s grunge. And I just remember her being very different than like at least looking very different than the person that she presents herself to be as an actor today.
Yeah.
And it was almost like she was doing the whole like indie, like New York film thing. You know what I mean? For a while.
Yeah, it does seem like she did that for a while. And I've read interviews with her recently where she talks about having done that. And I don't think I ever could have done that because I was never cool. But that's one thing that I know I've never been is like people will be like, oh, you're cool as a person. You know, they'll be like, oh, it's cool. But it's like the same thing from like,
fuck, I wish I was cool, man.
Yeah, no, I'm not cool. Yeah. I've never been cool because because cool people don't care as much. And I very deeply care. So that's the thing is that I can't not care. But yeah, I
think go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just excited to talk to you.
Yeah, no, I mean the morbidity thing, and I also think I thought because and I've heard this too. Like I remember somebody sent me an article once about Michael Jordan, and they said in it he said that he always thought he was going to die young. And he said to me, he's like, obviously you're not Michael Jordan, but maybe this is why you are like this. Maybe that's part of the reason why you've always thought about dying young. And I said, yeah, I think it's that, and I think it's my mother. And my mother did die young. My mother was only 42 when she died. So I think that those two things definitely made me very morbid. And I also think the morbidity was a reaction to... It's funny, I felt like people got a lot of the wrong messages from my characters and my movies. Or I thought that they saw, like, Matilda was a very strong character. She was a very tough person. But people always just wanted to talk about the magic powers, or they would always say to me, well, I thought I had magic powers after that movie. And I was like, guys, the whole point is that she develops those magic powers in response to abuse and because she gathers knowledge, you know, it's allegorical. And it's so funny to me when people will say, I get this all the time. People will say to me, we should do a Matilda 2. And if you do a Matilda 2, and I'm like, I mean, if there were like a good enough script, you know, maybe, but I also do feel like the you know, I'm not going to turn that down, especially if it's working with Danny again, because working with him was wonderful. Yeah. But I also think, and Pam Ferris actually told me an idea she had for a Matilda 2 that I think would be very funny. So, you know, if it was with that group of people, you know, that's definitely something I would consider. But people always say the same thing. They say there should be a Matilda 2. And in Matilda 2, it should be Matilda's child who has the powers. And I thought, no, I don't think that would work.
That's not tracking, right?
Well, for several reasons, I don't think that would work. And first of all, I mean, maybe it's just because I know this character as a child, but it's really hard for me to imagine her, like, grown up and married with children. Because it's also like, well, then who is she married to and who are her children? And that kind of forces you to think about, like, her home life and her relationships and like her sex life and things like that, and things that I just don't think should be speculated on. But also I think, I mean, if you want to speculate on that stuff in fan fiction, go right ahead, of course, but I'm not going to officially sanction that, you know? I think it's great for when people make fan fiction. I think it's really awesome. My goal in life is to write something that people write fan fiction of. But yeah. That's always been one of my goals. But cool. I think that another reason it wouldn't work is Matilda would want to give any child she had a happy life. Yeah. And I don't think that's where the powers came from. Yeah.
I'm going to pitch an idea for you.
Yeah.
There was a movie that came out a little bit ago called the Miss Pettigrews.
I heard about that. Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard about that. Yeah.
Go see it. Please go see it and tell me what you think and text me. It's beautiful. It's cool. It's like Tim Burton-esque. It's very whimsical. It's much more of the blockbuster, you know, kind of have to compete with the Maze Runner and those kinds of things. But it's a really beautiful, I really like that kind of movie. What I think would be interesting is if Matilda actually was running a school that was like working with CPS that would have to take kids in that were abused, and maybe those kids have developed their own powers, and maybe she's like,
I've heard people have suggested that. They say I think that she could be kind of a Professor X character from the X-Men, where she takes in these kids who have these powers and she teaches them. And I think that's a cool idea. I think also the idea of Matilda, I mean, I personally believe that Matilda grew up to be a librarian. I can't see her doing anything else. Right. And I can't really imagine what her personal life is like. Like, I don't know if she would get married or if she would want to get married. I don't know if she would want to have children herself or raise children herself. I don't really know. I can't really imagine that much about that, because I think that would depend on a lot of different factors in her life. But I could definitely see her being like a children's librarian or working as a librarian and working with children. That is something that I think that she could be doing. Let me ask you this. Could you see
yourself being a librarian and working as a children's librarian?
I mean, probably. I've worked with children. So many times. I still I mean, I don't even know how many jobs I have anymore, but like, I still work with children. I still, do like volunteer work with children and do like actual job work with children. I worked at a nonprofit for years where we repainted New York City public schools called Public Color. That was really fun. And I worked with kids from ages, I think, like 11 to 20. I mean, some of them weren't really kids anymore, but that was where I was when I was at the school, and somebody thought I was one of the students. But right. I did all kinds of stuff with kids, and I worked with a lot of really wonderful kids, and I've worked in schools, and I've been a nanny, and I've been all kinds of I mean, that's something that I like doing.
Matilda as your nanny? That's amazing. You should have had a Matilda tax. There should have been a tax for that.
I mean, people, they really liked, I remember they used to like it because I would do accents for them. And once I remember babysitting somebody and they were like, can we watch Matilda and you can tell us about making it? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I think
that's cool.
I got distracted, but like my whole point with social media was that I think I felt for a long time that it would give me kind of control over the narrative around my life. And I remember like pre-Facebook and everything, I wrote a letter and I had one of my friends post it anonymously on IMDb because I was really sick of the rumors that I was seeing there. One of the rumors was that I was dead. I remember there was a rumor going around that I was pregnant. There was a rumor. One that I saw in there was that like somebody saw me at a party and I was very, very stoned, which is very funny because I hadn't been stoned. Like, I'd never touched weed. So I was, maybe 20 when I saw this. And it's funny because nobody questioned that somebody had seen this. Everybody was like, and the responses just evolved into whether or not weed should be decriminalized. Mm-hmm. And everybody, and it's so funny. And I just remember looking at that and just laughing so hard because I was like, I've never smoked weed. I've never been high at a party. I was not a partying person. Like that just wasn't who I was. And there were safety reasons involved. It was something, and I thought that was so funny that it just evolved into that. But I remember asking my friend if she would post something there. I also saw somebody said, oh yeah, she was in my sorority. And I thought, I wasn't in a sorority. And I went to NYU. I don't even know if we had sororities. We might have, but sure. I
don't know if NYU had Greek life. I know Columbia did.
NYU kind of did, but I think we had a couple, but I mean, I knew some guys who were in fraternities, but I don't think I knew any girls who were in sororities. So who even knows?
So weird. Yeah.
But I wanted to reclaim that narrative. And I think that's why I was so dominant on Twitter for most of my 20s was I was like, I need to speak for myself. I need to speak for myself. I need to speak for myself. And it's really only been the past few years where I've been like, how much do I need to say? And is this the best outlet for it?
Girl, you got to get picky because people will take whatever, they'll take all of you. And that's why I have so much respect for the time that you share with me and talking to me.
Yeah.
And why I don't want to just start the conversation from, hey, miracle on, it's like, I don't want to have to go back down that road. What I'm definitely interested in is what you were talking about in regards to all of the jobs and also even before that, how you became on my radar after obviously growing up with you and loving you and all that, sadly never meeting you, I don't think. But I think you had, by the time I was doing the Disney thing, I think you were not doing that. You were doing the college thing or something. No.
Yeah, I mean, I saw you on TV.
By the time I was by the time I was 16, I think you were probably just not, I want to know where you were. Where were you when I was 16?
Well, I think that I mean, by middle school I was burned out, which is a very funny thing to say,
I
but
hate to hear that.
I know. I was just, and I was going through a lot in my life at the time. Like, somebody who was like a real mother figure to me, like, went out of my life, and then my dad got remarried, and that was a big adjustment because that's a really hard time to bring a new parent into the picture. And I mean, my dad, was doing like what he really believed was the right thing, but it was very hard. And so there were a lot of big changes in my life, and there were a lot of people around me that there were some people around me who were not very helpful, and then there were some people around me who were very helpful and were very, loving and caring.
Okay, so
And
you were roughly what when your dad got engaged? You were 12? No, your mom passed at 12. But
no, my mom
how old were
passed when I
you?
was 8, and then my dad got
Okay,
remarried when I was 13.
got it.
So, and I remember looking it up, and I think actually, like, I mean, I had like the type of college boyfriend who would like take a psychology class and then come home and be like, I think it's this psychology problem that we're having. And I'd be like, oh, for God's sake. But I remember him saying to me, he said, developmentally, you were at the worst age to lose a parent, and you were at the worst age to gain a step parent.
Oh, geez.
And
Well,
I was
but
just
no,
kind of like,
what he didn't take into account was that you were also leaving a part of your industry
yeah,
and that amount of notoriety that you had. It's very hard to put all of that into words, and it's certainly
it
at the age that you were at.
it is. And it's like, it was very hard. And also it was, I mean, it was very hard, but it was also just so much. I mean, it was kind of a loss in some ways because it had been a constant in my life, which is
Yeah.
something that I think is very, that is something that people don't understand, is that it can be a constant in your life and it can be a comforting thing. The same
You
way
mean
that
the
the industry
industry and the
can be.
success.
And because people look at it and they think that it's so unpredictable, and it is. But first of all,
Yeah.
I think it's more unpredictable for adults because with children there's a smaller pond.
Oh my God. Yes,
And if you
absolutely.
yeah, and if you work once as a child actor, reputation goes pretty far. So if you
Yeah.
work pretty well as a child actor, you tend to get booked again and again because people like to
Right.
work with you, and it's word of mouth.
Right.
So there was so much upheaval in my life that acting became that thing for me. But I think I was burned out on acting because I didn't get the same joy out of it that I did performing on stage. And
Okay.
I also, and that was really what I wanted to do. Like, that was something that I thought was fun. And because when you have an audience, there's a connection there. And so I
Hmm.
always used to say theater feels more real
Yeah.
because it's in the
Because
moment.
there's
It's
human people.
yeah, it's in the moment, and you have a connection with an audience. And
Yeah.
so that's something that I really liked doing more. That was something that I really had a fun time with.
So when
And
you stopped doing the film, you stopped sort of actively looking or loving the film,
yeah,
like acting for film. Were you starting to do more theater then? And we
yeah,
just
I
didn't see
was.
it?
I was. But it
And
was
we didn't know
more,
about it.
well, it was just more stuff at school. It was just,
Okay.
I mean, I had an improv class at school, which is a very which, tell me you grew up in LA without telling me you grew up in LA. Yeah, I took improv comedy in the 90s at my middle school.
Yeah.
Um so that was something, and I got really into choir too because, and that was the funny thing, was that I was actually really scared to be on stage
Hmm.
because it was totally different than I had really bad stage fright,
Yeah.
which I eventually got over, but I had
And how'd you
terrible
get
stage
over
fright.
it?
I think it was doing improv classes and just dying
Interesting.
on stage over and over again because improv, it doesn't always work. And
Oh my
it's so funny
God. I feel
because
they call
yeah,
that exposure therapy, right?
it
Your
is like
boyfriend knew
exposure
that from
therapy.
college?
It is like exposure therapy.
For
Yeah.
real.
And so I did that, and I started doing that, and I also I joined choir, and I started singing because I'd always loved music, but I'd never really, and I took voice lessons for a while, but I'd never actually pursued it, and I was too scared to sing on stage. And I still don't think that I never sang any solos in choir or anything. I was too scared to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, maybe did like a duet once or twice, but it was that I felt you get the immediate dopamine hit. You get that, which is so different than being on a film set where sometimes it's very fun and exhilarating, and sometimes it's just very dull and tedious.
Yeah, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. People don't realize 12 hours a day it can be very, very tedious. Yeah.
It's on and off. And I was so just the immediate rush. I was like, this is amazing. I love this. I want to do this more. So I started doing that more because I was like, this feels real. Also, I was a very pretentious preteen. So I was just like, theater's more real. And I kind of moved away. It's funny in a way because I moved away from film in the same way that I think a lot of people move away from like their family and their religion and like maybe even their culture when they're a teenager, and they distance themselves. And it wasn't until I had that. If you talk to a lot of theater people, you will hear them disparage film, like disparage an entire medium because it's not really real, and you don't really, film is a director's medium, and
you're just
theater
a
is
prop.
an acting. You're just a prop. You're just cattle, and
feels that way.
Yeah, it does feel that way. And it does feel that way. And it is true that for a long time, the idea of sort of, auteur theory in film, like, oh, well, it's just that it all goes down to the director. It all goes down to the director is, a load of crap and has led to the enabling of some very dangerous behavior.
That's so true.
Sometimes, death and assault and things like that. Yeah. So, but I think that theater for me was just where I was like, oh, well, this is more real. And then as I got older, what happened was my first serious relationship was with a film major. Mm-hmm. And so we just started watching movies together, and it was sort of, people talk a lot about.
So you were a film major?
I wasn't. I was a theater major.
You're a theater major. Okay, sorry.
I was a theater major.
Your first relationship was with a film major.
Yeah, but he was a film major. Okay. He was a film major.
That's interesting. Okay.
And he got me back into film. He got me back interested in film and filmmaking. And I started, well, he just showed me a lot of movies, and I just thought about all of the artistry in them and being a part of them and what it was, and just how it was very, because I'd seen, I never really cared for there were film students at my art school, but I didn't really care for them because they were just, a lot of them were just kind of, they were burnouts who weren't really doing very much. And maybe one or two of them would make like an actual good, beautiful film. And the rest of them were just kind of, fooling around. Now I went back to that school in the film department. The film department had only been around for a year or two at the time, so they were just kind of building it. Now I went back and I saw some... This was okay. NYU. So this was This wasn't NYU yet. I went to an art school called Idlewild Arts Academy, and it was an arts boarding school. And this also is why I have this big gap in my pop culture knowledge from like 2002 to 2005, because
that's my
I was
time.
Away at school.
How do you even know who I am?
I knew you because I would come home and my sister and my cousins would be watching Disney Channel. So of course I knew you. Of course I knew you.
I gotta know what's going on. Okay.
Got
it.
And I was just like, and I never thought that I would meet you or get to know you, because I always felt like people who were on the Disney Channel were like in a totally different category. And I was like, she's probably like too cool and pretty and rich to ever meet me.
That's so not the case at all.
Yeah. And then we actually met and we were just like, oh, wow, kindred spirits. But
absolutely.
Yeah. But
so you were at the boarding school, and then you ended up with
And
NYU.
then I went to NYU. And so the kids at the boarding school, for me, I went to middle school, and then I went to 2 years of public high school. And the public high school that I went to was in Burbank, and show choir was huge there. This was apparently, the rumor is that Ryan Murphy watched our old videos, and that was the inspiration for Glee.
Wow.
It was intense, but there was a lot of competition. There were a lot of mean girls. There was a lot of very crude, horrible boys. There was
really
there were a lot of parents. It was because it wasn't like you joined because you wanted to be in musical theater, which is what I was hoping it would be. It was, you were there because you wanted to be Justin Timberlake. You were there because you wanted to be Britney Spears. You wanted to be Beyonce.
Kids Bop. You wanted to be Kids Bop. Yeah.
I mean, kind of. Like, actually, one of the kids, the kid who was like the star soloist for us also did voiceover, and he was an actor as well. And it's so funny because there were a hierarchy of like which kids were cooler, which kids did. Theo, don't stand on my mic, okay? Sorry, my cat tried to climb onto my mic.
That's totally fine. We love cats.
He's a mama's boy. He doesn't like to be too far from me. But yeah, we did. So, and there were so many child actors where I lived because I lived in Burbank, where all the studios are. And it's so funny now because when I do voiceover, I'm almost inevitably always going back to Burbank to record. Yeah. And so it's so weird to be, I mean, I took a meeting at Disney a couple years ago and they're like, so you're from here, right? And I pointed out the window and said, that's the hospital where I was born.
Oh my God, I love that. They love that too because they're crazy and they're like, wow.
Yeah, I mean,
there's this whole time.
There's a Disney elementary school in Burbank. It's a big thing.
The employees, right? The employees have the option of.
Oh, maybe, but there's an elementary school named after Disney. But I wonder if they actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. There is childcare that is a daycare that has, I think, sort of like a curriculum element to it that is right across from the lot, and the employees can send their kids there. But I don't know a lot about it. I will say, in terms of random jobs, which I definitely want to get into, I don't know if you know this, but I interned on the Disney lot as a production intern in the post-production department at ABC Studios, and I have some random ass stories to tell you about. But it's hard because
the food there was good.
Oh my God,
they had a really good. They had a really good, and it's funny though because the cafeteria there is really good. And then I went to the DreamWorks one, and it is better than Disney's. And I was like, this is so. I bet what happened is somebody went to the Disney cafeteria and they were like, this is really good. Let's make it one step better than Disney's because DreamWorks and Disney are always in competition with each other.
Yeah. Well, until Disney owns DreamWorks, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, which will probably happen. Do they? They might actually. They might. Who even knows anymore?
God. Who even knows?
But I was like, this is so funny that theirs is just a little bit better. But anyway, yeah. So my whole thing was middle school. I was burnt out. Middle school and the beginning of high school, I got more into performing. Show choir there was very competitive.
And then when did you go to Idlewild? Was that just a summer thing, or was that?
No, I was at my public high school for 2 years, and I was really depressed. It was not a great school, and it was not at the time. I mean, now it's a much better school, but it was not.
Was it Burbank High?
It was Burroughs High.
Burroughs.
It was Burroughs High.
I think I went to the prom of Burroughs.
Oh, really? Yeah, so. It was just, I did not fit in there, and I was going through a rough time at home and, fighting with my parents and nothing like serious, but it was
like
just.
With your stepmom coming into the picture, it was probably an adjustment time. And
it was a major adjustment, and there were things that she and I still don't agree on, like. She's Catholic and very much wanted me to be Catholic, and my mother was Jewish, and I was very strongly Jewish, and I really think that she believed she was doing the right thing. Sure. But it felt disrespectful to me. Yeah. It felt disrespectful to my mother's memory, and it felt disrespectful to my own beliefs and culture. So so we were fighting about that and fighting about other things, and I was like struggling with my sexuality and struggling with my friend group and struggling with all kinds of different things. And and my parents said, I remember I came home one day and there was like I woke up in the morning and there was a brochure, and my parents had said like, why don't you try going to a different school? Why don't you go? And at the time, they really believed that private schools were better than public schools, which is not true. But they said to me, why don't you go to a different school? And I would say, no, because I don't want to leave behind choir. And choir at Burroughs was kind of a cult. It kind of was.
You felt safe in that, though. It kind of seems like.
Well, I felt safe when I was performing. I felt safe. I mean, there were girls in there who would bully me, like different kinds of bullying in different kinds of ways. And there were boys in there who were like exceptionally creepy, but got away with a lot because they were a tenor and they needed tenors. And there was so much stuff there. And there was like a lot of politics where they would be like, if you misbehaved, you get knocked down to one of the lower choirs. And like, they favored the mixed choirs so much more. They didn't like the girls' choirs as much. It was so much There was
That's
so
so
much
interesting because you came from such a like the most competitive environment, and then how does that feel to then know that you're this movie star that is now in the school scenario?
I think that I actually used to say to people, everybody says Hollywood is fake, but high school is way more fake.
Yeah.
But it was also, I think, and this was probably one of the biggest conceptions about me, was that I must be selfish and self-absorbed and self-obsessed and egotistical. And so I think that was one of the things that like the choir director and the choreographers, who were really mean, would do. They would be like, oh, well, she needs to get knocked down a peg. Let's put her in one of the beginner choirs. They always thought I needed to be knocked down a peg. I mean, and there was also...
I've got a similar experience. I do relate to that 100%.
There was also a hierarchy of child actors there. Like, for some reason, like the kids who were on Seventh Heaven were considered cooler, and like the coolest of all kids were in Gap commercials, and were models, and I wasn't as cool because I was in children's movies. Mm-hmm. And that was...
I actually experienced that, to be honest with you, because I was never in CW shows,
right?
And I was in Disney shows. So even to this day, a lot of the CW gals get the Hallmark movies because people grew up fantasizing about them, and now they've done a full circle. Well, now they're moms. So with me, it's like this whole weird thing of, is she a celebrity or isn't she? And I've lived my life independently of that, and I've taken to social media to control that narrative too. So social media, I think, also can be positive because it can bring people of like minds together in its best form. I've seen that on TikTok faster than I had ever experienced it on Twitter. It's interesting that you talk about social media and bullying and all that, because my experience on Twitter has simulated that of being bullied in high school.
Oh, no, same. Absolutely same. I'm not really interested in Twitter anymore, really. I think every now and then I go back on there because there's people on there that like I've met and loved, and it'll be like, and it'll be people that I wouldn't talk to otherwise. It's like people who like have a cute cat or dog who live in Australia, and like writers who live in Nova Scotia, and veterinarians who live in Chicago, and like all these like super awesome people, that I agree with, on different things, and I feel very strongly about. But I think that it is addictive for me. And I think that it's sort of like being on Twitter kind of reminds me of when I did this in middle school and in high school a little bit too, where I felt like I needed to be the funny one in class, and I would make jokes all the time. And I thought to myself, I thought about it later, and I was like, if I had stopped trying to be funny, and I had actually tried to focus on, geometry or English class, or, practicing my irregular Spanish verbs, how much better would it have been? But I think that I was always thinking short term. I couldn't imagine long term for myself. And I didn't ever think that I would be 34. So... And well, I think that's, I wasn't sure.
Morbidity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just couldn't imagine myself. At this age. And
do you feel like, can you answer honestly to this? Do you feel like you grew up too soon?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
I think
but that doesn't necessarily mean that you were traumatized or abused by the industry.
No,
it just means that
I grew up too soon. I mean, I do think it's funny because I don't think I was traumatized by the industry, but I was traumatized by the experience of being famous.
Yes.
That's something that I say a lot that people don't quite understand, because they always say, oh, Hollywood is so sick, Hollywood is so twisted. And I say, my experiences on Hollywood sets weren't really bad. I had some that were not okay. There were a lot of times where I think like they would ask me to work overtime, and that wasn't okay. Or there would be like,
it's a corrupt system.
There were actors who were bullies. There were actors who were, who said inappropriate things around me, things like that, where there was actually a story I wrote in a book about, an actor who'd been in the industry for a long time who made an inappropriate joke to one of the camera assistants. Yeah. And I wrote that, and I wrote that into my book, and my editor said, I think we need to take this out because we could be sued. And this was me too.
But it happened to you. You should be able to say it if it's true.
It didn't happen to me. It happened, I saw it happen to somebody else. And pre-Me Too, there weren't a lot of, there was a lot of like, we need to be careful about this. Yeah. So I was like, okay, that's a story that I'll maybe tell another day. And and I think that, but for me, it was the experience of being famous that was the traumatic part. It was everybody knowing my name. It was the people pleasing part. It was the pressure on me. It was and it was things that I kind of tried to shy away from. And people will often say like people, I've heard some people say to me like, because somebody like made a snide comment about child stars on Twitter, and I shouldn't have engaged, but I did.
Yeah, you
and
can't help it.
I said
I did
like
that the other day.
Yeah, it's a bad habit. But somebody wrote back to me saying, "Well, they're child stars. You were just a child actor." And I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I've never claimed that I was a child star, because it was drilled into my head when I was a kid that the only stars are in the sky. There's no such thing as a star. And so I was like, okay, I agree with that, but a lot of the reason that I wasn't as famous was because I did not choose to be. Like, there were parts.
I know that. I get that.
Yeah. There were a lot of choices that I made. And the reason that I took so many children's roles was my parents were trying to protect me. Mm-hmm. But they couldn't. That was the thing. Instead, I just got, I got maybe even worse perverts because they were fetishizing a child, and getting like, and it's so weird when you are the awkward girl at school and you have like bad teeth and like your bra strap's always showing and you have acne and you're so awkward, but full grown men are sending you letters. Yeah. That is a strange thing where I was like, where I realized, and we talked about this because there was a show that you did a pilot for. Ooh, what? Boarding school.
Yeah.
Where they wanted me to audition for like the fat girl part.
Oh, ridiculous. Okay.
And I, at the time, like, I was there and I went there and I was like, I don't know if I was fat at that age. I don't think that I was, but I told them, I was like, I don't think I quite fit the body type that you want for this character. And they're like, oh, we just put you in really big clothes. I was like, okay, the Jan from Grease thing,
Yeah, interesting.
Now I think about that and I'm just like, that is so disgusting on so many levels. But I read for it, I didn't get it. And I remember the whole time thinking there was another part in there that I really wanted to get because I thought that she was a character that I could relate to more, and I thought that she would be more fun to play. It was the one who is always going through phases.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah. She was hilarious.
I remember reading it, and I thought this is a character that I could play because she was much funnier, and I thought she was kind of neurotic, and I was like, oh, I could do that. She's and then I looked at, like, I saw the headshots for the girls that were being called back for her. And I was like, oh, okay. I get it now.
Yeah, so that's interesting too because, I was forced to wear a really big padded push-up bra for that show.
Yeah.
And they basically told us that Fox said that we had to do that, and I was 16 at the time. And I was just coming off, or no, maybe I was 18. I don't know. Was I 18? How old was I? I was right after Even Stevens. But no matter what I was looking like at the time, they were like, you need to amplify it. And it was like really tasteless, if you ask me, because I was kind of like, this isn't how you go about that with a bunch of girls. Like, this isn't a good start.
Well, I had a lot of problems actually because it's funny because like it's funny because there was a movie that I auditioned for where they wanted me to play a totally androgynous character. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I look back at all the other actresses that I went out for the same parts with, and I'm like, okay, so it was Mae Whitman and Evan Rachel Wood and Aaliyah Shawkat and who else? Oh, and Kristen Stewart. Kristen Stewart got like 5 parts that I didn't get.
Interesting.
And I look back at it and I'm like, oh, they said they wanted a tomboy type, but I think all of us grew up to be gay or bisexual. So I'm like, casting directors, they know things even before, the kids themselves know it, I think, because we were a type. We were the tomboy type for a while.
Yeah.
And so
is Mae Whitman queer?
I don't know, actually. She's a friend of mine. I don't know.
Okay.
I've seen her. Oh, and Kylie Sparks too. Kylie Sparks is non-binary and I think pan. And
How interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know if Mae Whitman is. I've seen her like make jokes on Twitter about like dating Queen Latifah and stuff, which was like something that I wanted when I was a teenager. I was in love with Queen Latifah, so like Queen Latifah in Chicago ruined me. But I don't know if she is or not, but I know that she's at least made jokes about it and
Sure.
So I don't know if that's how she identifies, but.
So when did you start to realize you were going through something in the high school phase, and you were mentioning that you had
there were girls that I was in love with and who did not, who did not feel the same way, but I kind of suppressed that part of myself for a long time because I felt that I couldn't, I was too afraid to. I felt like the burden of everything on me, and I really only owned up to it, and everybody around me like knew that I'd had girl crushes or that I'd like I remember when I came out to one of my best friends from college, she was like, yeah, I've seen you make out with 3 different girls. Like, I know that you, and not just in a like, this is like a silly thing I'm doing on a dare. Like, you were into it.
Right,
and I was like, yes, but I'm officially claiming it now. And so I just kind of said that I kept collecting exceptions. I was like, well, she was an exception. She was an exception. She was an exception. And
interesting.
One of my best childhood friends said that for a long time, he would be like, well, I'm not gay. I just really admire this man. And I heard that and I remember thinking, because that was the way that I felt too. And, that I really admired these girls and wanted to be around them and thought their hair smelled really good. And, it was like that. But, and I think that was another reason why I left my school was because it was just too difficult for me. There were things there where I'd like had crushes on girls and there was just weird rejections and there was just all kinds of meanness and cruelty and
confusion and fear and all that
and
stuff.
It felt much better to go to a place. And I mean, I was in like the Gay Straight Alliance at school, but it was theory versus practice, and then when I went into Idlewild, because and I never finished telling the story. I came downstairs one morning and my dad had this brochure on the table. And they knew that like I was fine with being independent. I was fine with being away from my parents. And this is something that I think is crazy now when I think about it. I had lived in other countries away from my parents, starting at, I think, age 12, maybe?
Oh, wow.
Age 11. Like I had been in other countries with I essentially lived in Toronto without my dad. For several months when I was in 7th grade, and I was happy with it. I loved it.
You had a guardian. I
did have a guardian.
Right?
I did have a guardian. Her name was Lucy. She was wonderful. I also had a studio teacher named Lori who was absolutely wonderful. So I had people looking out for me. Sorry, what did you say?
I said that's good to hear because I don't have a very good opinion about most studio teachers, but.
We were very choosy about mine. I worked with one, Richard Wickland, on and off for several years, and he was wonderful. And then, I went to when I went to Toronto, we had one that Lisa Jacob had worked with. And she was wonderful, and she's worked with a lot of and she worked with.
I botched her name. Shoot, when we did that Comic-Con panel, I said Jacob.
It's fine. Lisa's Canadian.
No, did I say Jacob? Okay.
She goes by Lisa Jacob Jones. So, but she's wonderful. And this actor had worked with this teacher had worked with like she worked with Tara Strong a lot when Tara was like very young. She worked with a lot of Canadian actors Tara. And worked with people who were on Degrassi and like all these things. She worked with like the one child that was on Queer as Folk. Like, I think somebody on that show dated like someone who was still married and had a kid, you know, and still in the closet. But she was wonderful. But my parents knew that I was okay being away from home, you know? So they took me to, they had this brochure for me, and I looked it over, and I think one of the things that really sold it for me was, first of all, I would be studying theater and be able to do my classes. But another thing that sold it for me was I really wanted to get out of there. I wanted to be away from Hollywood. I wanted to be away from Southern California. I wanted to be somewhere else. I had this very sort of like ladybird thing where I was like, I want to go where real artists are.
I thought you said ladybugs. Sorry. I don't know why I thought ladybugs, but ladybird, yes.
Yeah.
Ladybird, that's a great movie.
Very, very much like, I want to go where real writers are from, where real artists are from. And then, of course, I went to New York and realized, oh, wow, people are shallow here, too. It's just shallow in a different way.
Shallow with cigarettes and wearing black.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a very shallow kind of nihilism. So I was like, I just wanted to get out. And I remember looking there, and the colleges that I was looking at, I think, were University of Michigan and NYU, because I knew that University of Michigan had a good theater program.
Yes.
And I've always loved the Midwest. So although now I've realized that my seasonal affective disorder is really bad, so I probably shouldn't ever live there.
Or New York, I guess, huh?
I had a hard time in New York. I mean, I remember being in Toronto and being like, I love the seasons here. And then I actually I lived in New York where there were seasons. And I was like, oh, seasonal allergies, seasonal migraines, seasonal affective disorder. This isn't fun.
Yeah.
So...
For real.
And I thought about going to school in Canada too. And I remember looking at the list of college acceptances there that Idlewild students had gone to, and they'd gone to colleges in Toronto, and they'd gone to University of Michigan, and they'd gone to NYU. And I thought, oh, I don't know. My grades aren't good right now. I couldn't focus at school. I was depressed.
Right.
I felt like it was a very big school, so I had no individual attention, and a lot of people there, you know, and I can't really blame them, because like Burbank is like a nice place to live, but a lot of people just kind of hung around Burbank forever after they graduated. And, you know, a couple of them would like go to, you know, San Francisco State or UC Berkeley, and they would get out of town for a while.
Yeah. Or
but I remember thinking, Chapman was another one.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, well, I want to go away. I want to be out of here.
Yes.
But I don't know how to do that. So I went away to Idlewild. My parents took me and I auditioned, and I remember breaking down crying because I was just so happy to be there. And I felt like I could be open about my mental health and open about having crushes on girls. And I didn't come out there because I think I sort of had like queer imposter syndrome, where I was like, well, everybody here is much gayer than I am, and I've just had a few crushes on girls, but I don't know. And it also felt, you know, it was a small school, you know, mating in captivity kind of thing. And but I really loved it there. And I found, like, I had a teacher there who's still a mentor to me, and who taught me
that's great.
all about theater, and I learned so much more. And it made me really, what I realized when I was there was that I didn't just want to be an actor. Like, I didn't just want to be a theater actor. I wanted to direct, and I wanted to work behind the scenes, and I wanted to write. I really wanted to write. I was too scared to write, but I wanted to write, and I wanted to be involved in the process. I liked being part of a team. I even liked, like, I learned how to build sets, and like carpentry was so much fun for me. And painting was so much fun for me. And because I learned those skills, because I learned those hands-on skills, that's how I got my job later on, where I was painting schools with kids. I learned how to wall paint at Idlewild. And the teachers there were like, you're going to have to learn how to do all these things because you will be able to get jobs based on them. One of my classes, I had to sew a skirt for myself. That was my final project. And I sewed a skirt for myself, and then I wore it to college auditions. And I could say, by the way, I made this skirt.
Yeah, so, and it's like a topic to talk about.
Exactly. So it was, and that I think is something, and that's why I'm always saying my kids will learn hands-on practical skills. Not just things like there's a whole thing now with or I think this was actually a bigger thing a few years ago, like everybody needs to learn to code. And it's like, yeah, okay, you should probably know a little bit of that just because that's going to serve you well, but everybody should also know how to knit and how to sew and how to handle, and how to use a power drill and know how to wall paint and all of these things. They should know at least a little bit of it.
Well, so that was something I really loved there. You've talked about gender without actually mentioning gender, and it's not something that I generally talk about, but I really do have thoughts on it insofar that when we grew up, right? Like, I do think that gender norms were very strict. Obviously, it's way more fluid now, and everyone's on some sort of the spectrum, whether they're like super conservative or super not. Now, what I found interesting about growing up in your tomboy casting, what you were talking about, is, I didn't perceive you to be a tomboy growing up. I felt like you were very much just the every girl. And it does seem interesting to me that at a point at which you started to mature and come of age, it seems as though they were pushing you towards that casting. And maybe they knew, maybe they didn't, but, those gender norms affect us, and those castings affect us in so many ways. Like, as kids, they're like, well, I'm cast as like, the ingenue, so I'm gonna, just do everything this way, and I'm good.
You rebel against it too.
Yes,
you rebel against it. You rebel against it the same way you rebel against your parents and your teachers.
100%, because it's the biggest authority in your life.
Exactly, and that's why I pushed myself away from it, because I was sick of it. And I felt also that I was, Matilda was really the character that I felt I had the most in common with. And Matilda was the character that I really loved the most, because I wasn't as smart as she was, but I did love learning. I wasn't as academic as her. I was always distracted in class. I don't know if it's ADHD brain, which I was, diagnosed with several years later. I think that for me, I would always just kind of like, get distracted and my mind would wander. Although if it were something like reading or writing that I really loved, I would sort of hyper focus. And, I always got straight A's in English and literature classes, but, and I was pretty good in language classes too. But my mind would struggle with something if I couldn't understand. And I also think that being on a film set where you're told you have to do something until you get it right does sort of put this fear of failure into you. So it was like, well, if I'm going to fail, why even try? That's also something.
Like, you have to get it right, but you have to get it right in 15 minutes. And it's exactly. Like, that's not how kids work. Like, they have to,
it's not. So I would give up on it. That reinforces it. And that is, I think, one of the biggest issues with child actors is the fear of failure. And that is something that I always tell the kids that I work with. Like, you in any capacity, I'm like, it's okay to make mistakes. Nobody's going to be mad at you if you make a mistake. You made a mistake. Okay, we try again. And a lot of times you learn better from mistakes.
100%.
So,
100%.
But that was
That's
something
amazing.
that I think that we didn't get as kids. We didn't get a chance to make mistakes. And then we didn't get a chance to make mistakes because we had the pressure from outside. And I've always said that, having a fan base is often like, it's often like having another set of parents that, maybe don't actually love you that much, whose love is conditional. So you have to do, and I've had to tell people, things about myself, and they're saying like, oh, you never did this, you never did that. And I'm like, well, no, I couldn't, because I was a role model to children. I never wanted to shoplift, but even if I had wanted to, I couldn't have done it because I knew the consequences.
So you felt pressure. You felt some pressure to like to rebel in the way that people typically rebel, like in order to like kind of grow your brand in some ways.
I think that I wanted to play. I thought it would be fun to play more of a brat, because I thought that people thought I was too cutesy and like more and that they were sick of that. They didn't like that. They thought I was too cute, and I would hear people say that. And then as I got older, it became sort of a different thing. And also I was a tomboy for a while, and a lot of that was because I was under the influence of my dad and three brothers.
Right.
But also I felt like the more feminine you were, the more of like a target was painted on your back.
For sure.
And also there was so much pressure, because if you were feminine,
then you really couldn't mess up. Then you really couldn't mess up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You really couldn't mess up. And also,
no
people
excuse.
would be like, who do you think you are? You think you're so pretty? You think you're this? You think you're that? And I also sensed for a long time that I was not going to be like one of the most beautiful girls in school. And that's also because the family that I came from, my mom didn't value looks that much. She didn't value it. And probably because her mother did to an absurd degree that my mom was rebelling against that. But I didn't really know. My mom didn't like shopping. She didn't like jewelry. She didn't like makeup. She didn't like any of those. She never focused on her appearance. She always like the only pictures I have of her wearing makeup is if she's in a play at, her high school or at Northwestern where she went. I think that that was something she drilled into me. And so, and also she wasn't, even if she had been, she wasn't around during those years. So I was kind of lost. I didn't really know what to do.
Yeah.
So I also knew that I wasn't going to be the most beautiful girl. And as I got older, I realized, and that like when I auditioned for boarding school, I was like, not for my boarding school, but boarding school, the show.
My pilot that I
Your pilot.
I did, that was
I learned.
Mess,
I was
actually.
like, okay, I'm not the pretty girl, and so they're going to be making me be the fat girl, and the fat girl is the butt of all the jokes, and the fat girl is
And I'll tell you what, that the girl that ended up playing it was not heavy set by all means, and it's insanity.
And even if she were, that's
they knew
messed
it was
up.
wrong. It's Fox. They were trying to be Salacious when Salacious was like still edgy. This was like pre-Kardashian, and they were doing these weird things where my character actually ends up kissing a guy at a bar. And it turns out
he's a teacher.
He turns out to be the teacher. So it's like a Ross and Rachel, will they, won't they, but it's highly illegal. So and I was 16 kissing Eddie McClintock or whatever I was. Maybe I was 18. And I keep forgetting how old I was. 18, time escapes us.
But
when you have an entire childhood.
But also 18, it's very strange to me that people are like, 18, it's fine now. It's like,
it's so weird.
So you couldn't, and people would do this. It would be like, you couldn't fantasize about Emma Watson or Dakota Fanning or Elle Fanning, a day ago, but you can now. Well,
they do. Yeah, I know. Trust me. But also, I do. Go. Sorry.
But what I would say is that I also felt that being feminine was very vulnerable.
Definitely.
So.
This is the podcast we're on.
Exactly. And so I wanted to move away from that. From that. And I also knew if you're, it's a line in a chorus line. Different is nice, but it sure isn't pretty,
God, I love that.
I never knew anyone who was different. Yeah, pretty is what it's about. I never knew anyone who was different who couldn't figure that out. So you. If
oh my God, I love that song. Now I have to
I love that song too. And that's kind of, and that was another thing too, is that in theater, I could be beautiful.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
They don't care so much about your face. They care more about your voice. They care more about the way you carry yourself,
your talent,
And so I could play Juliet in a class. I could play Hermia, even though I knew I wasn't those types because they were they were very beautiful, but they were like. You're short and you look cute from on stage, so it doesn't matter as much. And there's like pictures of me in like a corset and like a dress doing like a early 19th century waltz with somebody and I do look very beautiful in a way that I wasn't going to ever look on screen. And I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not over here being like, I'm ugly, but it's like.
Good, because I was about to hype you up, so.
I mean, that has been like my own struggle that I've had to deal with, but I also I know that people are attracted to me, and I know that I have qualities about myself that I like, and I know I have good days and bad days like everybody else, but it's also the difference between playing basketball in high school and playing basketball professionally, Or being tall enough to be in the fashion show in the mall versus being a professional model, or being,
Have you seen this meme? It says, you're not ugly, you're just poor. And it's like the meme of like a Kardashian, like before and after.
It's so true. It's so true. Like, harsh. Do you know how many people I knew, so many girls I knew who grew up wealthy ended up modeling? And it's just because they could pay for all those things. Did they have a lot of plastic
surgery?
Yeah. They could do that. They could do that.
Yeah.
It's what it is. And also, I think all the time, like, well, not all the time, but I've thought before, like, oh, could I get plastic surgery? Should I? And I'm like, well, what would that be saying if I did, you know, that like, and I think, like, I know I've known people who have had plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery, and I'm like, good for you. That makes you really happy. Like, I've seen people who've had it done. And everybody has stuff done to some extent. Like, I have bonding on my teeth. I have, you know, I've definitely had things done, like not serious, but like to my teeth. And you know, everybody has these things. And like so many people get Botox. People get Botox for headaches. Like, it's really not a big deal. But I do feel like, for me, I do also kind of want to be like, you know, oh, you know what? You don't have to have a perfect nose.
Right.
You don't have to have, and also a lot of this is, and also a lot of this is like different cultures and such too. Like, I think there was was it Gigi Hadid? One of them said recently that she felt like she'd erased her culture. Right. Yeah, she'd erased her culture by like, by getting, you know, by changing her nose. She said, I wish I
would have kept my ancestor's nose or something like that.
Exactly, which is like really kind of profound, because I'm like, that is something.
Coming from her, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, coming from her, absolutely. I think that's pretty interesting. And that's something that I think too. Like, yeah, it's like, am I getting rid of like my Jewish nose and my, like, you know, high Irish forehead? You know, like it's what
that's who you are.
Yeah, it's what my family has.
I've had the same problem, by the way. I had a manager basically tell me that I would only start to work again if I had a nose job, and he like looked into non-invasive nose jobs, or like, you know, he started looking into this stuff for me, because I was devastated, and my brother had always made little like quibs about my nose being nubby or something, and like, you know, it's so funny. Like, one thing I did do is I posted to TikTok about that moment, and it was very cathartic to have so many people be like, that's ridiculous, and like, it's silly to think that like community helps shape you, but it does help people like us, I feel like, feel a little bit more seen in the narrative that we choose to tell. Now, it is interesting that you had said, you know, I don't feel like I'm this like well-read, you know, academic person, because as long as I've known you as an adult, it's been as an academic, because the story that came out to me was, here's Mara Wilson, she's at NYU and she's a writer now, and like, she's got this like, she's got this awesome Twitter, and
okay, but where did you go to college? Where did you go to college?
I went to Barnard at Columbia University.
Okay, so Ivy League,
years. No. It took me 12 years to graduate, or to walk rather, and then honestly, like, I went there for political science, and I thought I was going to be like Angelina Jolie, because who doesn't literally love Angelina Jolie? But I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do humanitarianism. Like, it's my whole calling. Like,
my dad has a pilot's license, and every now and then he'll be like, did you know that Angelina Jolie pilots her own plane? And we're like, yes, Dad, we know. We all know how cool Angelina Jolie is.
We all love Angelina Jolie.
Yes, exactly.
I know. God, she's such a queen. Anyway, so, you know, look, like I had these like big picture thoughts for myself, but did you, when you were going into NYU, finally feel like you had the Idlewild experience of like that sort of almost like a diet acceptance, but when you came to NYU, what did that do for you?
It was hard at first. The thing about NYU is there's nobody holding your hand. You are thrown into the deep end of the pool there, and it is a very career conscious, and into New York. And it is a very career conscious school, so everybody is there to get a job. And I struggled a lot my first semester or two, and because I was sleeping through classes, and I've always had problems with keeping my attention on the right thing. And in New York, there's a million things to distract you. Even if you're not partying and having like the time of your life. Like, I barely left Manhattan my first year. Even if you're not doing that, you're still, there's so many things to distract you. And so I did not have the best grades my first semester there, and or my first year there, really. And it took me a while to finally I like got into therapy with a therapist that I really liked. And finally I'd been in therapy sort of on and off, and there was a wonderful one at Idlewild too. He was a great guy.
See, if we have these therapists available to artistic kids in a school. Like, that should exist. And social workers should exist for professional kids. That's all.
I mean, this is something that I actually want to enact legislation about, and I've heard that Allison Stoner wants to too, and that's why the two of us should talk, I think.
You want to add me, CC me, okay?
Yes, please. Me. Yes, please. And it's something at the convention that we did last time, I talked to everybody about it, and as soon as I talked to everybody about it, they were like, "Oh, thank God you brought that up, because we need that."
Yeah.
But
good. Then you know what? If other celebrities are going to get involved, amazing. I think that it needs to be a trifecta. And what Allison had said too was, she did the module thing that she's been doing. I don't know if you were in on that. I thought you were. Were you in on that call that she did? That was like a couple people.
No, because I never met her. But I probably should be.
Yeah. Listen, you're hearing this first, everybody, that like me and Mara and Allison Stoner, we're all of the like mind to do something really cool and in the future.
I've been talking to Anna Schlumsky about it. I talked to everybody from Hocus Pocus about it. I talked to Matt about it. I talked to Lisa about it. I've talked to so many of my friends, including friends who, were
Lisa
never
would be great too,
child stars, but Lisa's very into like therapy and yoga and such.
You don't have to be a child star to have been traumatized by being in the arts at a young age in a professional capacity. In fact, some of it is the people that have succeeded
Olympians, my God, people who are in gymnastics, even if they weren't horrifically abused, which too sadly happens, in figure skating and gymnastics, these things, even if there's not that, there's still pressure. There's still pressure from eating disorders to just, that is something that, and there are sports psychologists out there. So I'm like, why are there not performing arts psychologists? And in fact, at Tisch, at NYU, they did have, they started you out with a therapist who specifically worked with art students. And then they would refer you to somebody else.
Because NYU does have a history of suicides on campus.
They do. That was one thing that, I have a lot of criticisms of NYU, but they had very good mental health support. They had the wellness exchange. So that's who you
started to go see? You started to see their therapist? Or
I saw their therapist, and then eventually they referred me to an outside therapist, and she is actually still my therapist today.
Interesting. See, this is what I'm talking about. That's great. Lifelines are very important.
Exactly. And so, and there was a 24-hour hotline at NYU that you could call, and eventually, if you needed help, they could refer you to somebody else. But
interesting.
I used to call them because I'd had a panic attack. I called them with like big existential fears, where I'd take a philosophy class or something, and then afterwards I'd be like, what does it all mean? And, call them in the middle of the night and just be like, we're all going to die. What do we do? And, what's the meaning of life?
That's not awesome, but
yeah,
cool
exactly. It was very cool that they had that. And they also had I remember talking to this one girl who I'd seen in a couple plays at NYU, and she was fantastic, like one of the best actresses that I'd ever seen. And afterwards, she went on to do Yale Drama School, and now she's doing like a bunch of professional stage work, and she's fantastic. And I remember running into her once, and I was like, "Oh yeah, you were so wonderful in." You were so wonderful in this production of like Spring Awakening we just did at school. Like what, and she was like, have we met before? And I was like, yeah, I think we have. And she goes, yeah, you were at that reducing anxiety seminar. So we were learning how to do belly breathing and things like that. And it was very, so NYU had that, and that was
the
great.
culture. The culture of mental health and inclusive-ness to mental health was
but it took me like a year or so to get there, and the reason was at first I couldn't accept help. I couldn't accept help, and the only person I would accept help from was my boyfriend. But that put a lot of pressure on him because he was still just a teenage boy, and he loved me, but he had his own stuff that he was going through. He was trying to figure out, did he want to go into film? Did he want to go into law? Did he want to be a writer? Did he want to do what? Like, he eventually became a lawyer, which he seems to like really love. Yeah. But it was just, it was, for a long time, I was just so dependent upon him. And it was, I think that happens a lot in your first series relationship.
I had the worst first. Yeah. Anyway, we won't even talk about the relationship.
Yeah, we don't need to get into it, but I think
that's even a whole other topic.
Even if you have a happy relationship, it might not always be the healthiest when you have your first, serious relationship, and
yeah, especially when you have had, I feel like, a lot of stuff go on in your childhoods. Yeah, man, it's a lot to unpack, and it continues to be a lot to unpack. But basically, I am curious though. So you're at college, you struggled the first year. Then when do you decide that you want to start writing and be a writer and then come back to LA? I mean, I remember I felt like you were a ride or die New Yorker. And then when you moved back
I thought I was too.
to LA, I was like, wow, this is a full circle moment for Mara.
Well, I kind of thought I was too, but I mean, coming back to LA is a very recent thing for me in terms of life phases. And sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. And sometimes I'm like, why don't I move to another state? Why am I not living, somewhere? Why am I not living in Seattle? Why am I not living in
Austin's great.
Austin is great. I had a wonderful time in Austin 2 years ago. I was having a lot of pain and stress in my life at that time. And then I went to Austin and had one of the best weeks that I'd had in years. I went to Barton Springs. I hung out with one of my favorite musicians, and he was incredibly kind and lovely and what I want to be when I grow up. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Shout out to Rhett Miller. Rhett Miller from the old 97s.
Oh, cool.
He's
okay.
Yeah, they're a big Texas band. They're actually out of Dallas, but they perform. Yeah, and he also does a lot of stuff with different musicians and comedians and things like that. So he's
That's
always
Austin
at the Largo
right
in LA. Yeah,
okay.
Performing with different comedians. He has a great show that you would also actually be great on. Let me see if I can make that hook up.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
But he's very open about mental health and sobriety. Mm-hmm. And I just stopped drinking for health problems, and he was so cool about that. And my publicist doesn't drink either, so we all just
Are
drank Topo Chico.
Hell yeah.
I'm kind of
You're sober,
I stopped drinking.
Sober curious.
Well, I stopped drinking because of health problems that I had.
Sure.
And that was another reason why moving back to LA was a good idea for me, because I was fainting whenever it rained in New York. It rains a lot in New York.
Oh my God. Okay.
And it turns out I had a blood pressure condition. And that blood pressure condition got worse after I had I had a virus and I was sick for a couple weeks. And after that, it was kind of like long COVID, where you just get really sick. And so my early 30s were a mess. And then when I finally got that under control, that's when I started having all of these really horrible pains in stomach pains and things like that were unexplained for years. And that turned out to be endometriosis. So just when I'd nailed down one problem, they were like, oh, by the way, you have this other problem. You need surgery. You need PT. You need all of these things. And I was just And for a couple years there, I was so miserable. I was crying all the time. I was not myself. And my friends around me were like, you were really not yourself. My family was my friends and family were like, you were a different person. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so, I mean, that stuff didn't happen until later. But I think that for me, probably what turned me really into writing was I always wanted to be a writer. Always. Just from the moment that I knew what books were, I wanted to write books. And that was just my lifelong dream. And anytime people asked me in interviews when I was a kid and making movies, they would say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I would say, I want to write. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll act, but I want to write. And so, but I didn't really know what. And I usually, it's funny because when I was reading a lot of scripts as a kid, I started to write my own scripts.
Interesting.
And actually, it's funny. I really wanted my friend Lacey Chabert, who is also a child actor. I really wanted her to be in one of my scripts. And I was just asking other child actors I knew. I was like, will you be in my show? And they're like, I was 9, so, they're going to humor me. They're like, yeah, sure. Andrew Keegan's going to be in your project. Yeah. But then I wrote whatever. I wrote basically based on whatever kinds of books I was reading at the time.
Yeah.
But my prose was always really terrible. It was always just Shannon walked down the hall and, stuff like that. And
like a script.
it was just very silly. It kind of had this like Da Vinci Code type thing of just like, it was very clunky, very clunky. And then I took a playwriting class with my teacher, Jenny Mahoney, and
at NYU.
And I realized that I could let my characters speak for themselves. And I had spent so much time in my life overhearing adult conversations and also eavesdropping on my teenage brother's conversations. So the first full play I wrote was about teenage boys. Because that was from the time that I was, I think, 5 until I was 14, there was always at least one teenage boy in the house. And sometimes there were 3 teenage boys in the house. And there was always this, and my brothers were very smart asses. They were like if Ferris Bueller got all A's. So they were kind of
smart asses. I love it.
Exactly. So they were all very, they had this like Greek, there was always this Greek chorus of teenage boys in my house, just all of their friends all around. So yeah, that was what I did. I wrote a play about teenage boys. And
my God, I want to read that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's aged well, but it was really fun to write.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And I'd be happy to send it to you though. It was called Sheeple.
Yeah. Actually,
because it was,
Hey man, I would love to see you do more of everything, more producing and
I want to do
even directing.
Directing, I tried to direct in college and I wasn't that good at it. I think that I just didn't have enough confidence in myself. And I remember at the time, I had a dramaturg because they would assign you a stage manager and a dramaturg, and you would also in turn stage manage for people and dramaturg for people. And she basically helped me direct my play. She directed my play for me. Yeah. And now she's like, her name is Annie Tipp. She's a fantastic director. And she's now a working director. And she's doing Dave Malloy's Octet up at Berkeley Rep. And probably will have a Broadway show within the next few years. Annie Tipp is a fantastic director. And that's one really cool thing that's come out of NYU was so many people now that I worked with, I've been able to connect with other people. Like I'm on a show called Hell of a Boss. And there was a friend of mine who wrote really cool musical theater that's sort of like southeast. He's from Florida. He was kind of that had kind of a fun, eccentric twist. So I went to Vivienne, who does the show, and I was like, look up these musical theater people, look up this person. Andrew Butler would be very good for this. And he ended up writing a song for a character who's the embodiment of lust. And it's very fun and sexy and silly. And they had, James Monroe Englehart, who's a Broadway actor, come in and sing it. And I got to be like a friend yenta and a career yenta. And that's like one of my favorite things to do is be like, you guys should talk. I'm going to introduce you to you. Like,
this is another reason.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
One of my favorite friends from college. He's a wonderful guy. Like I took I had his husband meet my friend who does music because the two of them do music. And I was like, you two should work together. You two would love each other. You have the same sense of humor. Yeah, that's what I want to do, which makes me think like, I mean, I do want to direct, but I feel like probably producing is more my style.
Right, sure. Yeah,
so
I love that.
That's something that I want to do. And now that like my health is a little more under control, I want to do this. And acting has been up and down for me over the years. Although recently what I've started to do more of, which has really sort of scratched the acting itch, so to speak, is audiobooks.
Yeah,
because it feels like theater.
Yeah, it does. I know
it is the closest thing I can feel to theater because you are playing all the characters. Yeah. And you don't need to it's not as like precise as with animation voiceover.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You control the pacing and
you control the pacing.
You give your best performance and you can, I like it.
And your characters and you don't need to do a totally different voice.
Yeah.
You don't need to be,
just a little different for every character.
Yeah, you don't need to be Tara Strong or Cree Sumner or like any of, or Christy Romano Rooney, being able to do a million different voices.
Freaking person. I don't know about that. Hey, so what are you doing right now? What can we promote? Where are your audiobooks? Do you have a recent audiobook that we can
I do. I have one that came out called One for All that I really loved doing. Also, if you're a Night Vale fan or Night Vale curious, It is Welcome to Night Vale has a book called The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home. I also did it's kind of an audiobook. It's kind of a podcast. It is not safe for work, called The Pet. That was very fun to do. And I also am in the show Hell of a Boss. I was also on BoJack Horseman.
Yes.
Both of which can be found online.
Yes.
And so, that's what I've got going on. Writing-wise, I've got a couple of projects that, knock on wood, will pan out pretty soon.
Yes, I'm knocking for you.
Yeah, and I'm recording a couple other audiobooks right now, and we'll see when I can announce those.
Amazing. I mean, obviously, I think that now more than ever, people can come out of the woodwork and show you how positively you've impacted their lives and their childhoods. And in some way, I feel like that's gotta help sort of almost like enrich the circle of your journey.
It does. And I think that when I was a kid, I couldn't accept the compliment.
I understand.
It was too hard. And it just didn't feel... I couldn't.
Complex.
It is. I couldn't accept it, and now I can, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, good. I'm really, really happy to hear that, and I'm happy to hear that your health is getting better. And honestly, this is the first conversation of something I think we should continue in studio in LA with Allison. And so I would just tease that maybe there'll be a part 2 pending everyone's availability, and we may be able to really, in the future, really do something cool and work together and help people. And I'm just excited to have you in my life. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you for letting me ramble.
Oh my God. I love your rambles. I love them.
Yeah.
They're not rambles. I love them.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, always lovely to talk with you, and always lovely to do stuff with you. And we'll keep at it. We'll keep doing it.